welcome to part 2 of episode 0 of the pilot of Teammate Collision, the Grand Prix Rejects homemade podcast. Hello, Lennart.
Hello, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm doing absolutely fine. This is definitely not being recorded at a later date to be put at the beginning of the episode.
Absolutely absurd, the idea. Absolutely absurd.
We are just going to continue our conversation from this moment on, completely naturally.
So naturally, it's organically farmed. Oh God, what am I on about?
Don't touch each other, please. They go right down deep, and they have collided. So both the BWT cars collide.
So it's an inside squabble between the two Williams. Looks to me like Rosberg tapped the back of Webber. That is absolutely the last thing any Formula One team wants to see.
It's a Lacey and Heidfeld. I don't know what's happened, but it's the big poor Alain Prost, as if he hadn't got enough pressure on him.
Oh, we've lost a wheel. It's a racing engineering car that's ripped his left wheel off. Furious at his teammate. That will be a very fun team briefing.
Well, we pretty much already announced him as a topic for later, or I did, for that matter. We have to talk about Romain Grosjean, or do we want to save that for later?
No, I mean let's get into it. He's one of the most easy to talk about. I mean, Romain Grosjean. He was the great French hope. He came out of a couple of years in GP2 in which he won it, and he had a huge amount of hype, and in my opinion, far too much backing from the media. He was one of those drivers who he had a bit of a following. Like people liked him and wanted him to succeed because he was a nice guy with curly hair, and he was an absolute total disaster almost the entire year.
Yeah, so we cannot ignore that he had some good races in that period. He was there in Bahrain, he was on the podium, he was second in Canada, so there were a lot of good stuff, and of course a lot of bad stuff that we'll get into. I, for one, am mostly looking forward to talking about Belgium 2010, the race that infamously ended in a race ban. Here's a fun fact for you. Do you remember D'Ambrosio drove in 2012?
I do. He was the only driver swap that year. I mean, that in itself is rejectful. That there were no the amount of crap drivers in 2012. They all kept their seat except for Grosjean.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, really.
Bruno Senna kept his seat for the whole year. I mean, just put Bottas in the seat. I know you don't rate Bottas much nowadays, but Bruno Senna was crap. Just fire him and replace him with someone else.
What was Bottas even doing that year? Like, the feeder series can't have gone on that long. Like, Jesus Christ, once he had whatever position he had locked up, I don't even know. Did he win the GP3 championship? Was he in the...
As far as where he won it, yeah.
I genuinely do not remember what he did before going to have won. And once that was dealt, just chuck him in there. But then again, if Alain Prost has a late season debut didn't do anything for him, who are we to argue?
Yeah. Oof. Well, Romain Grosjean, he crashed in Australia, he crashed in Malaysia, he crashed in Belgium, he crashed in Suzuka. Any I've forgotten?
Didn't he crash in Brazil?
Maybe crash in Brazil. The four I mentioned were all on the first lap as well, usually with Schumacher.
Monaco, have you mentioned Monaco?
No, I didn't mention Monaco. He crashed a lot. That was the thing he was most remembered for. Like, he was very fast and quite clearly of the talent that was F1 worthy. He was basically just Pastor Maldonado, except slightly more consistent. Just like once Grosjean got himself past the first 5 or 6 laps, he was pretty okay, but he was just so crash prone. And it wasn't just in the race; it was also in qualifying as well. I recall he crashed a couple of times in qualifying. He was so erratic in his pace that, in hindsight, what he needed was a year at a backmarker team to get used to it and then to jump up to a fast team, because I'm not sure he expected maybe when he was jumping into Lotus in his debut season that he was actually going to be in a car which was maybe not within championship contention. In the end, I think finished fourth in the championship, and deservedly so. I mean, if he'd done better, he could have won a race. He is one of the perfect examples of 2012. He almost represents 2012. He had incredible pace. He crashed constantly. He didn't take the chances that he had. He got called nicknames. He got banned. I mean, what the hell of a year for Romain Grosjean. I mean,
yeah,
it's almost the thing you make a movie about, to be honest.
Yeah, so it would be more the dark humor one, but though actually about that race ban, the thing is, there was a theory, not by someone prominent, but the one that you could find in many comment sections, that he basically just got the ban for Italy for basically just getting involved with the championship contenders, as I can't even say he bowled out Alonso. We'll get to that in a second, because I have my theory on that one. The thing is that, he just had a lot of crashes, a lot of avoidable stuff, and some would argue the ban was for basically punishment for screwing Alonso and Hamilton out of the races. Some would say it's just a combination of all the nonsense he came up with. I personally am on the margin about that. Like, I think if he had taken out someone less important, he probably would have gotten away with like a suspended race ban or something among those lines. But the thing about 2012 Belgium specifically is that I've been looking at the footage as part of my research, and to be honest, I don't think he was at fault.
That's what we're putting at the beginning of the podcast now. There you go. Then let's hear this hot take. Give it to me.
Basically, if you look at it, he drives towards La Source, and really Hamilton was on his inside, and he wasn't making any erratic moves. He wasn't like, okay, I've got to close him off. He was just basically in a position where he just had to follow his line, and that line basically led him towards Hamilton's car. And I personally would say that Hamilton really could have avoided this whole mess by braking earlier. So, yeah, I'd be inclined to give that one really to Lewis, but
I totally get what people are saying when they say, oh, it's only because he took out famous drivers that he had an issue with, because, he took out Schumacher 17 times and no one cared. It's like, okay, well, it doesn't, like, there were definitely calls for him to get some kind of proper punishment, because this is back in the days of 2012 and early 2010s, and it's the same nowadays, really, that we're in a post-disqualifying age where there is no high penalty for misdemeanors and crashes and that kind of thing. And so the FIA and the stewards have had a lot of trouble, as they still do these days, coming up with a grand punishment for things which are really, really, really bad. And you had a season where Hamilton especially was crashing all the time in 2011. He actually got the record, I think, that year for the most in-race penalties. And it's like, well, what do we do with this driver? Do we just keep giving him a drive-through penalty every race when he hits someone off? Or do we give him some kind of grander penalty? And then in 2012, who comes along but Grosjean, who is not famous and does not have a world championship behind him, who crashes into basically everybody. And that race ban was deserved, I think, because on one hand you shouldn't... On one hand, you should only judge something for the one incident. You shouldn't judge previous incidents, I don't think. But at the same time, he did kind of crash every single race. Like, it's hard not to bring context in. And so there was so much dislike, and I can imagine from the other drivers as well. I can imagine other drivers in the meetings behind closed doors must have been talking about it. So I think that the FIA were pushed far more than they actually wanted to disqualify Grosjean for Italy. And just my final thing I would say to that is, I'm not sure necessarily that it was because he took off front runners. I think it was just the cinematic look of it. is the fact that it was on the first lap and the camera was right on it, and you have 3 or 4 drivers in the air. One of the cars barely misses Alonso's head, and it was such a visual, graphic depiction of what was happening that if it had happened at further up the track, Grosjean hits Schumacher goes out, it wouldn't have been so bad, because you wouldn't have had that kind of tension of the first lap and the whole world looking at it, and that it just invites replay after replay on the news. And what do you know, for the next day or two on the news, on the sports news, you would see that replay. Oh my goodness, look at this crash, what should we do about this driver? So I think a lot of it was to do with the visual aspect of it. As much as it was taking out the front runners, I think a lot of it was to do with the fact that it was a very easy way of pointing at something and saying, look, this is a problem.
That's a very good argument. I mean, that is actually something I didn't account for when mentioning that theory. Like, we had Hamilton's previous miserable year with all the involvement by Massa it had, and of course, you're right, the cinematic, so to speak, effect behind it was obviously, well, it wouldn't go so far as bringing the sport in disrepute, but it really wasn't helping. So I figure that you have a good point, and I obviously fully agree with the concept of a ban. Grosjean did enough to earn one. That's why I said, for example, my theory was if he had taken out someone less important, then he would have gotten a suspended race ban, and he would have cashed that in by Japan. So, I mean, whether he misses Italy or Korea really wouldn't make much of a difference now, would it? So, the general point of it remains, and honestly, you are right. There is a certain conceptual issue in that you don't want to get in a situation where you give a guy a penalty based on his reputation, but you also need to set a line, okay, you can't drive like that. So it is a bit of a difficult stand. I mean, we just had that issue last weekend where Charles Leclerc just did his usual thing and did his usual dive bombs. And that's another case where we just have so much precedent that, in a way, if something goes wrong, it would be kind of incorrect to not do anything about it, because it's been so long coming. There were other incidents he had. Was it Bahrain last year or Zakia last year? I don't recall, where he took out Max. And it's just something where you don't want to, where you take every case by case to be fair, but also have the general issue behind it. So
I mean, well, at least in hindsight, we can. No, I can't embarrass it. In hindsight, we can say that. I mean, after that, Romain Grosjean never had any other stupid crashes or first lap incidents. Like 2 races later. Oh jeez, like that's the best bit, is that like he had that and then he came back and crashed two races later in Suzuka. Oh jeez, Grosjean.
Yeah, and the thing is, what you mentioned about the other drivers that were pretty much that you can say were influencing the FIA to do something. Mark Webber had his famous interview after Japan, and honestly, when Mark Webber says something, I'm pretty sure that a very healthy part of the grid thinks it. So, so it was really just not a great year, and I think we've been saying that a lot about many drivers, really.
Yeah, that's the best thing about 2012. That's why it's so interesting, is because people were mostly crap. So. And the people who were good were not usually in the best cars, which is also what makes it good.
Yeah, like
Grosjean's teammate Kimi Räikkönen. Now here's not a controversial one, but perhaps a divisive one. What is your opinion of Kimi Räikkönen's year?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, because I'm going to be really boring and say it was good. Like, it was a showcase that whatever he had lost in 2008 and to a lesser part 2009 was back again, that he was having his joy back, that he actually wanted to drive. One thing with Kimi is that let's be real here. He was never by the standards of modern F1 drivers. He was never the hardest worker.
No, absolutely not.
He was someone who basically used his talent. He used it very much, but he never had that edge to really be the best at what he does. And therefore, it was both good from a fan perspective to see him back who he was, and it was just good for Lotus for hiring him. The PR boost was valuable. The win in Abu Dhabi was also very valuable. And yeah, I fear, outside of his very hilarious incident in Brazil, which funnily enough prevented him from being the first driver to complete all laps in a Formula One season.
Yeah,
So-
that's true. Yeah, when he completely went off the grid and then just drove around in the outskirts of the track. He actually left track limits for like a solid 30 seconds. Yeah.
it was brilliant. And how he just drove on the old track. A lovely 1972 flashback, but yeah, not really helpful. And of course, it came 2 races after that. I know what I'm doing, Team Radio. And here I have a controversial opinion for you. I hated that Team Radio behavior from him, and I hated that F1 fans loved it so much.
I get where you're coming from as well, because he's a sportsman and he's in a team, and on one hand it's true that he does know what he's doing. He's a professional sports driver. He knows what he's doing, and he's now in a position where he just needs to be left alone to do it. But also, I get what you mean, because what I'm assuming your argument is that it's endemic of his entire personality that he doesn't really give enough of a crap about anything to really have put in that 100%. Is that what you're going to say, or have I misread that?
That was part of it, yes, but I also am more... This is going to sound surprising for many people who know me, but the thing is, I just think it's really well, for lack of a better word, a dick move. Something that you just... It's just unpolite. It's just awful. Like, the guy is doing his goddamn job. He's giving you information, and even if you don't think you need it, if you think the information is worthless, then I don't know, say, yeah, thanks, but no, it's not necessary, or just simply say no communication, please. Like, other drivers can do it without basically taking a dump on their race engineer. Even Fernando can do it with.
Was it not all drivers can do it, but some drivers can do it.
Yeah, obviously there are others. To take again a modern example, we have our dear boy Yuki, who is fond of shouting at his race engineer, the poor soul.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I openly admit that I am a bit biased on that topic. It could just be me, okay, not a fan of his personality and his attitude towards the sport, period, so I'm punishing him extra for something that is really harmless. And odds are, if you ask his engineer about it, he'd say, yeah, he knew what he was doing, why was I talking to him? But it just rubs me the wrong way, so to speak.
At the other end of it, the engineer knows what they're doing as well, and the engineer is doing their job, as you say.
Exactly.
It's once again the best bit about 2012 is that you have Kimi Räikkönen, and I would say that 2012 is the second best year of his career. That's my hot take, other than 2005, obviously, where he almost nearly won the championship. Like, I would say 2012 was his best year because it showed his consistency. He showed his consistency in not just his pace, but also his caring for what he does. The issue with Räikkönen, I think that Räikkönen's career took a complete nosedive in 2007 when he went to Ferrari. And that's going to sound completely stupid to people, because it's a completely stupid thing to say because he just won the championship that year. But I think that there was something about him moving to Ferrari that he just lost that edge which he had at McLaren. At McLaren, he was always fighting against his machinery to be the best. It was that underdog quality whereby he was pushing and always trying to get the best. And he didn't always win because sometimes the car just blew up. But you could really tell that he was fast. And at Ferrari, he had the best equipment on the grid, and he had a much more reliable car, and he, funnily enough, did far less of it, I think, than he could have. He took 2 years out of Formula One because he basically got kicked out. And when he came back, and he could have fallen flat on his face, but he didn't because he tried. And 2012, he tried really hard. He was incredibly consistent. He was probably the most consistent driver of the entire year. And he got, I think, every single race bar one, I think, in the points. He didn't retire a single race. And he still had some of the best reject moments of the year. I mean, what more do you want?
Yeah, it's beautiful, really. And the thing is, even the race he didn't finish in the points, that wasn't even his fault. It is just Lotus, okay. Lotus said, okay, we're not quite as competitive as we'd like to be. We let him out there with the tire until basically the end of the race. And yeah, his tires just were gone by that point. So not even the 14th place in China was actually something he did wrong, something that he couldn't make work. But it was just a strategy that was never going to work, no matter who you had in there. And but as you said, there have been some very rejectful stuff, and yeah, he just was a good representation for 2012 as a whole, and he was a machine. You cannot put it any way. He used his entire talent. He basically just came in, did his job awesome, and yeah.
How about Felipe Massa?
The year that basically reflected this car. Not quite as much as Rosberg, but it was very much a product of his vehicle. Like, the thing is, Massa had a bad 2012. That is not up for debate, really. But the thing is, as the car got better, his results got better. His qualifying got better. And I've been on record saying that the F1 F2012
yes,
was not as bad as its reputation is. It was pretty much clearly either the second or the third best race car for every race bar post the Mugello test. And so the reality is, with a better number 2 driver, Ferrari had a damn good chance at still winning the World Constructors title. So Massa had a bad year, but his upswing very much reflected how the car just wasn't as bad as its reputation and how much it was a competitive vehicle again. He had 10 points finishes in a row from Hungary onwards, and he was actually, outside of Kimi, the longest running point streak by the end of the year.
Who, Massa?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I had no idea. Oh my goodness. Felipe Massa was the second most consistent point scorer in terms of
pretty much
points. Finishes them
from Hungary to Brazil, he scored every race. Had to podiums even, but... And everyone else had at least one thing going wrong for them or another.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Genox said that they wanted to put Massa as their reject of the year, that he was like basically slam dunk going to be it. But because of his performance in the second half, they didn't do it because he actually got a couple of podiums and he seemed to be more on pace. But I would say maybe the most rejectful moment for me of 2012. I don't know if it's a fantastic display of team spirit or if it's absolutely shameful in terms of what Massa's career had become. But I don't know if you remember this, but in the US Grand Prix, Alonso's qualifying had put him something like 6th or something like that, and Massa was a place or two ahead of him. And so Ferrari publicly basically said that they were going to change Massa's gearbox to put him 5 places back to put Alonso up a place on the grid. And Massa said, yeah, let's
and
do
on
it.
the better side of the grid. That was the most important thing, even that he was on the bad side on the grid and he wanted to get on the good side.
And it was like, the thing was that Massa was like, yeah, let's do it. And it was like, I can't tell if that's Massa being a fantastic team player, which I guess he was. He could have said, no, fuck you, I'm not going to do that. But he'd said, yeah, let's do it. I can't tell if that's a showing of how nice he was or like just like how far he'd fallen. It's like, damn, this is like, yeah, I'll take a 5-place penalty for no reason other than to put my teammate up a place on the grid.
This is actually something I would struggle a bit with to answer, because in a way, it's both, really. Like, if I imagine myself a Formula One driver, okay, I didn't have a particularly great year. I'm out of championship contention. If I recall, I was under contract for next season. And whatever. We're not doing anything noteworthy. I'm not winning any races, barring something going wrong at the top. And I say I can help my teammate like that. Yeah, let's do it. But on the other hand, being in that position where you can where it's a reasonable thing to intentionally cripple your race like that, then you just have to ask yourself, what am I even doing here? Yeah. Why do I bother showing up? Like, jeez.
Yeah, I mean, and they kept him for another year as well. That's the crazy thing, is that Massa's second half post-accident, let's call it, at Ferrari was very poor, almost entirely, I would say. He had a couple of good races, but most of it was very poor, and it kept on for so long. Ferrari they stood by him, and maybe far longer than they should have. And I was going to say that, although this doesn't really count, I was going to say dishonorable mention for rejects of the year for 2012 was Ferrari, for one, continuing to have Massa as their second driver, and two, taking Fernando Alonso at the absolute peak of his powers and still not letting him win a world championship.
Yeah,
but I know that you don't. I know that you rate the Ferrari F2012 higher than I do. That's something I don't want to get into because I simply just don't know enough about the technical aspects of it. But that's like a debate which is carried on, especially on GP Rejects, about how fast the Ferrari really was that year. Was it as slow and as underdog a team as has been made out by like that kind of narrative that's been formed? But it's just the fact that Fernando Alonso was as good as he was. Like, it might be one of the best season-long performances like of that era, and they still couldn't win it. Ugh, Ferrari. It's where careers go to die.
That is most certainly true. Like, again, if we're being really honest, there are only two drivers who genuinely managed to make a serious impact at Ferrari, and they were Lauda and Schumacher. Everyone else, some got world championships out of it, but if you really think at drivers who build a team around them, it's just Lauda and Schumacher in modern years. Where modern, in quotation marks, let's say 70s onwards.
So you're saying modern, but like Lauda was like coming up to 50 years ago now.
Jesus Christ, we are old.
Like, it's like you're calling this the modern era, but like I don't know how many people on the forum were even born when Lauda was winning championships.
I think there are a few, but they are very select few.
I mean, your definition of modern is very, very broad.
Yeah, pretty much. If you take this to the logical extreme, there's the ancient era, and then there's outright the modern era. Like, what's Formula One's Middle Ages? Don't exist. Leave me alone. I know what I'm doing to bring them back. I mean, no, but the reference was necessary, totally. No, but yeah, that's really that is something where Ferrari just, you win in spite of Ferrari, not because of Ferrari.
Yeah, it's a truism, and I can't think of any examples against it, so I can only agree.
One thing that I should clarify about my opinion of the F2012, it's not like I base my opinion on technical knowledge. I actually am very much a narrative fan of the sport. I'm happy if I can understand the setup option in motorsport games. That's pretty much as far as my technical understanding goes. I'm just someone who looks at results, at statistics, at narratives, and, well, at the, to use a cliche word from other sports, the eye test. So, if someone can make a reasonable case, no, the F1 2012 was as bad as it was because technical fact 1, 2, 3, 4, then I'm just gonna have to concede defeat. But so far,
I mean, I'm not going to argue against you. I simply don't know. Like, I've always seen it as a very underdog car. I've always seen it as like third, fourth best, and I've always seen Alonso as having that incredible.
Oh yeah,
season. But then again, I was young. I may have been wrong. Who knows?
And of course, even when I say that it was the second or third best car, it was not the Red Bull. It was barely on level with the Red Bull. I think the best race the F2012 has as a car in terms of its competitiveness was Korea, and there Ferrari finished third and fourth. So, yeah, the Red Bull was definitely better, and by a noticeable amount. That is not up for debate, not even for me.
I mean, we haven't even mentioned Red Bull. Like, is there anything to mention about Vettel or Webber from that year that you want to talk about?
Well, honestly, not really. I mean, Vettel he had a couple of not great moments, but all in all, he was the World Championship level we know him as. He had the 4 wins in a row. He had some miserable incidents, the Gorka incident with Kartikeyan, which was totally his fault. And I think he also had a struggle lapping him in Austin, which hurt his chances of beating Hamilton towards that win. But all in all, you can then point at something. One criticism that was very prevalent at the time, very omnipresent, was that Vettel was not a great racer. As in, if you started down the grid, he'd go nowhere. He would not challenge for the win from P whatever. And that was something I think he very much put to rest with his drive at Abu Dhabi, where he came back from dead last to finish on the podium. So that is something that is very worth mentioning. But outside of that, and Webber, honestly, can I remember anything Webber did that year outside of winning Monaco? And calling Grosjean the first lap nutcase? Yeah. Honestly, no.
I hate to give Vettel praise. I'm not his biggest fan. And so, I do think his Abu Dhabi race was very, very lucky. I think he was very much a recipient of very well-timed safety cars, more than he was actually a good driver of that race. I mean, he did collide with Toro Rosso in the race. So, I would go as far as to say it was like a championship drive, but yeah, I mean, I might even go the opposite way than you. I might just stick my controversial neck out on the line and say that I think 2012 kind of showed up Vettel for being someone who really needs a perfect car and a really good setup all weekend to do well. I think he's a driver who, especially in those days, had a lot of trouble adapting to race weekends. I think that, especially if you look at, say, the races where Vettel won were almost universally boring. And this is not just because I'm not a big Vettel fan. It's true. When he won, he was usually on pace to win the entire time. So there was this kind of knowledge that he was going to win the whole time. Like, there was no... When he was on that top level, he was unbeatable. And it almost seemed unfair when, especially to like a very kid me, who was just like, God damn it, he's so fast, and there's no chance that anyone's going to beat him. This is so boring. So 2012 was actually really fascinating, especially in the first half, because you had that long period whereby I think he won Bahrain, but I don't think he won anything else basically until the summer break was over. And it was great because he was really having to fight for position. And it's nice to see a world championship earned through racecraft rather than through, winning from pole, lead every lap. Vettel's 2011 especially was very boring. So even though I wish Alonso had won, I'm happy that Vettel won in the fact that he had to fight for it a bit more. I feel like it was far more earned than 2011, for example, or 2013, where it's quite clear that Red Bull and he just had the measure of the field. It has, as you say, a more of a narrative reward to it. You feel like you've watched 20 races and gone, yeah, god damn it, he won and I don't like it, but yeah, damn, he won, So.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, that is something where I differ from many, not all, but many Formula One fans, where I sometimes can look at a guy driving away from pole, having fastest lap, having led every lap or basically every lap, and just think, yeah, masterpiece. But I get fully when people are bored by that. Like, I myself have many Hamilton race where I just thought, why am I even watching this? And so, especially when you don't get when it's not conveyed that, okay, we're watching greatness in action. And that is something that I think modern F1 rules are really bad at. Because, see, back in, like, if you looked at a race from the 80s or the 90s, and you had a guy who was just the man, you just saw him go off into the distance, have 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds, a minute lead by the end of it, and you just realized, oh, that's a statement. I mean, I don't recall the exact number, but if you look at Vettel's win with the largest margin of victory, I think it can't even be 40 seconds, and I think Michael Schumacher has like 10 wins where he won by over 40 seconds, and that's just something where I think the impressiveness of the domination comes across better. But this is something I have a unique viewpoint on. That is something I don't expect many fans to agree with me on. So if anyone says they were bored by the Vettel domination back in the day, I fully get that. Though I want to stress that the Bahrain race was actually, if I recall correctly, quite a fun one, and where he had to fight off Kimi for the lead. But
yeah, that's true.
I
remember it being quite good. Yeah, I think also modern F1, like, we have to take these periods in and of themselves. Like, we can't. It's so difficult to compare from 2012 to 20 years previously, because it was just such a different time. And Vettel's era, which continues to this era, really, it doesn't encourage people to go off into the distance. There's no point in going off into the distance if there's a safety car going to happen, and you're just going to lose all that time anyway.
And just for the statistical correctness, I've looked, and his largest margin of victory is 32.627 seconds. And again, subjectively, it felt like every second race in the 80s had that kind of margin. So,
yeah. I mean, Senna was leading by how much? Like a minute at Monaco when he crashed? Like, had he won, he would have basically won it by like an entire lap. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, exciting.
Now I'm curious, and I'm going to just quickly look up how many wins above 32 seconds Senna and Schumacher had.
One of my favorite things about 2012 is just how many people had pointless patches. We've already spoken about Rosberg, but the other one is Sergio Perez, who some could even consider basically, if it wasn't for those pointless patches, like coming up towards driver of the year. Like, Sergio Perez's performance that year was so good. He almost won Malaysia. There was talk at the time where he didn't win it because, you know, he was a Ferrari junior and he might actually want to be Alonso's teammate maybe one year. And he didn't win it in Malaysia, but he nearly did. And in a better world he would have. And he was always punching above his weight. He was fantastic when it came to strategy, especially on those tyres. And then he got the McLaren contract for 2013. Fantastic. Good for Sergio. It was to be a sign of great things to come. Unfortunately, in hindsight, it wasn't.
And then it all went wrong.
And it went wrong as early as 2012, because the best thing about Sergio Perez's year is that he signed the contract for McLaren, I think it was before Japan, and then proceeded to score absolutely no points for the rest of the year.
Oh dear.
He scored 0 points after he signed his contract till the very end of the year, and it was just that is the stuff that rejects are made of. Like,
that's just a beautiful narrative.
Okay, another narrative. Pastor Maldonado won the Spanish Grand Prix from pole position, inherited pole position, but who gives a crap? Pole position, and won the race, and for the next 9 races had no points. 9 races.
That is historical stuff. We're talking Renault in the late 70s, kind of.
9 races in a row and no points. When points go to 10th.
Yeah, it's just... Yeah.
You're driving a 2012 Williams.
Man, he was so bad. And the thing is, like... honestly, I can't even talk about that Williams that year without getting upset. Like, take any experienced driver. You mentioned if Kimi was in that car. If
say it.
I don't know.
Say it, Lennart.
Yes,
say it.
I'm not gonna say it. If Rooms was in that car, it would have been so much up there. It's ridiculous. Honestly, P5 in the VDC was on the plate, especially with how much Mercedes struggled. The difference between the two teams was, in the end, 74 points, and Jesus.
He's going to try and dance around the outside. They come perilously close together. Hamilton forces Maldonado off the track. Oh, and they do touch, and Hamilton goes off into the barriers. Maldonado squeezes through, and Hamilton's race is over.
I will mention a few more things, and then I think we should probably wrap this up, unless there's any other... Wait, we should actually do our podium at the end of this, by the way, because we haven't actually... We've just been rambling for 2 hours. One interesting one that was said by Ginoc, which is even worse in hindsight, just because now we're many years later, is that they said that Paul di Resta was an arguable reject of the year, not on the basis necessarily of having a terrible year, but having had his career basically stalled by the fact that he had Nico Hülkenberg as a teammate, who at the time was pretty highly rated. People were talking about him going to Ferrari before Kimi did. And di Resta got basically completely outperformed by Hülkenberg, who had been out for a year and had just joined the team. And also di Resta had this... just had a reputation for being incredibly good at keeping the car on the track. So like, I think he only had like one retirement in like the whole of 2011, and the same in 2012. I think he only had 2 maybe retirements in the whole year. And
yeah, he had one retirement in the British Grand Prix, and he crashed out of Brazil, but he was still classified. So
and yeah, he was very consistent. So he had that going for him, and that was what I think kept him above Adrian Sutil, who that's another conversation. But Adrian Sutil was solidly okay, and di Resta was kept on instead of Sutil, and di Resta just did not improve. He didn't take over the number 1 position in the team. Hulkenberg turns up after a year out in sport and completely destroys him, and Hulkenberg narrowly won a race. Speaking of disappointments, Hulkenberg crashed out of the Brazilian Grand Prix when he could have won it. There's another driver who could have won a race that year.
The thing with di Resta is that, well, outside of a very short period, namely late 2010 in DTM, he never was not quite like Rosberg in that he never punched above his weight, but simply he just wasn't about doing spectacular things. He got you the car where it belonged, he got you something good, he got you decent racecraft, he got the opportunistic finishes where it presents him. He is technically not a reject, so... No, what I mean technically he unrejectified himself, no need to put asterisks on that. So yeah, the thing is, he was good but not great, and that is simply something that F1 generally tends to not forgive.
Yeah, that's a shame as well, because someone like him or someone like Verne probably could have done well in backmarker teams if they'd had the care to do it. Context, of course. Context is important, but...
No, Hülkenberg is a very good driver as long as it's not about finishing on the podium. But seriously, Hülkenberg came in. He had the edge on di Resta, and you could safely say it derailed his career. Though obviously it didn't help that he had that really long dry spell in 2013. But generally, I think he was pretty much not done, as in maybe if things had turned out differently, if Mercedes had been willing to invest a bit more in his career, to go back to our earlier point about the driver programs, he could have stayed longer in Formula 1. It's not like that, but the reality is the idea of Paul di Resta as I want to have this guy on my team, that I think Hülkenberg killed pretty effectively.
Yeah. I only have one thing left to talk about, I suppose, for myself, which isn't even rejectful. I just want to put a shout out to the 2012 HRT car. This is my favourite looking car, maybe in F1 history. I love how the 2012 HRT car looks. I think it looks fantastic. When I was driving in GPRO, which was this online, I think it's still around, this online racing simulator game. You could pick what your car looked like, and I always picked 2012 HRT. Great looking car. That's how can you give Karthik Kane Reject of the Year when he's driving that car?
Yeah, it's really not fair. Like, yeah, it's a beautiful car. Generally, I personally like the out of HRT liveries. Even the quote unquote bland 2010 one. At least it wasn't genuinely bad. It was sleek design, harmless, pretty backmarker. Of course, again we come to the fact that we are Reject fans, and thus obviously there is a tendency to give stuff that normal fans would look like and see something beautiful in it. And of course the 2011 one is a bit of a legend in the sense that...
This could be you.
Yeah, this could be you. Will never be forgotten. And on that note, did it ever became something? Was anybody you? Like, did they ever have a sponsor there? I don't recall.
If you do know, post it up on somewhere on the forum. we should have a.
That is a key Reject mystery. We must know.
Yeah. Okay. If one of you, the first person to post up on the thread, I guess that this forum will be, this podcast will be put up on. The first person to post up will get a grand prize. Something. I'll get the grand prize sorted later on. Some kind of grand prize. We'll be eternally grateful, and we'll tell you thanks. That'll be the grand prize.
Indeed.
Was there ever a you on the This Could Be You part of the 2011 Hispania Racing Team car?
It's a Reject mystery.
And of course, the noses. We haven't even mentioned the noses yet. The way the 2012 cars looked.
Yes, the good old ski noses.
That's it. That's all I have to say.
I think we mentioned almost every team, but we didn't even come close to mentioning every driver. So I suggest we could make a little game about it. Namely, I would say I'm going to name all the drivers we haven't talked about in any noticeable detail, and you give me the first word that comes to mind when you talk about their 2012 season.
Okay. Oh god, this is going to be bad. Alright, let's give it a shot. I am more than ready.
Alright. Now I'm already stumped because did we talk enough about Mark Webber to count?
Mark Webber, he won twice. He didn't do... how many words am I supposed to say? Mark?
I think it was one, but if you want, you can do 3 words.
Better than 2011? That's 3 words.
Yeah, yes it is. Kobayashi.
Podium was best. Him getting podium in Suzuka was one of the best moments of the year. Pretty good year. He was a pretty good driver, driving for a pretty good team. It would have been nice to have, if he'd had more money, he could have stayed around for a bit longer. I think he was really good. But
yeah, but the thing is, he was always associated with Toyota, and I don't think Toyota could have found any excuse to fund money into his F1 career.
Yeah.
Especially, I don't think were they starting in the World Endurance Championship this season or in 2012, or were they starting in 2013?
No idea. Not the person to ask.
Neither have I, but I think one of our listeners will tell us.
Alright, next driver.
Jean-Eric Verne.
Reject? But how?
Brilliant.
I mean, like, he's a reject, but, like, Narain Karthik Kane is not a reject.
Yeah, it's a classic case of reject that shouldn't be. Like, it's not even... If you talk about some drivers who are rejects despite having tremendous talent, like Eric van der Poel, then you still have a story, okay, yeah, that happened, that didn't work out. He had the bad cars, he didn't have cars that were worthy of him. And Verne is just... How? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who can win the Formula E World Championship is definitely F1 material. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I would say so. Like, we are talking no matter what you think of Formula E, and I have criticized the series myself a lot, but the reality is it has one of the best driver fields in the world.
Yeah, unfortunately it does. Yeah, that's.
Fortunately, that's a bit mean.
I mean, that's another podcast. I have many things to say. I'm not going to say them. Next driver.
Ricciardo.
I expected more. By that I mean that I never rated him all that highly when he was a Toro Rosso driver. He and Verne were about evenly matched, so I was very impressed when he was so amazing in Red Bull, especially the first 2 or 3 years. When he was Vettel or Kvyat's teammate, he was fantastic. In Toro Rosso, I never got that vibe. I never really got that world beater vibe. So I was actually very pleasantly surprised when he did do so well. But yeah, I would say I don't even remember what I said. It was my 3 words, but I didn't expect that he.
Something about expecting more.
I expected more.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and of course, every time his early career comes up, we need to mention that Narain Karthikeyan beat Ricciardo in a fair race when they were teammates.
That is true. So therefore, no, if at least we know that Ricciardo can beat Vettel, and if Karthikeyan can beat Ricciardo,
the Gorka is better than the 4 times world champion.
Yeah.
Eat your vegetables, kids. Is cucumber a vegetable?
Yeah, it's definitely a vegetable. Or the seeds are on the. A vegetable is a fruit has the seeds on the inside, and a vegetable has the seeds on the other part of the plant, if I'm not mistaken. So, but the cucumber does have the seed on the inside.
I believe you because I flunked biology.
I think that a cucumber is technically a fruit, but it's a culinary vegetable. This bit's staying in, definitely.
Worthwhile discussion. Yeah, well, now we have 3 drivers left. Timo Glock.
He got an amazing race in Singapore, and that was probably the best race of it. Sorry, the three words. Search.
I'm really bad at this. About that.
I'm really bad at this. 12th in Singapore. It's all going to be questions now, because that race in Singapore was the best backmarker performance of the year. It was consistently on pace to get points. All he needed was a little bit more attrition, and he could have got some. But
yeah,
that's the way it works. That's just the way it happens.
That was life for the 2010 teams.
Yeah. Not enough attrition in those days. There was just far too much. 2011 especially, far too much reliability.
Yeah, that was one good thing, undoubtedly good thing. Like there are many who would agree they are generally a good thing. But one undoubtedly good thing about the new turbo units that we got a lot of technical failures out of them, which mixed the grid up.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
All right, second to last, Jérôme D'Ambrosio.
Who? The Belgian? Shit, I don't know what I'm doing.
Actually, that's perfect. Who's the Belgian?
Yeah, I mean, he won a race in Formula E2 in the end, I think. At least one race. Jérôme D'Ambrosio turned up at Monza, obviously with no testing. It finished like 12th or something, and I mean, I don't think anyone was expecting anything from him. If he'd done if he'd done well, it would have been fantastic. But I don't think anyone was expecting him to do well. He did okay and was never heard from again. That was his last race. So.
Okay, and the last one, that one is going to earn us a bit of criticism because we didn't talk about him a single second until now. That would be Pedro de la Rosa.
Better than Karthikeyan. That was all you could basically say about De La Rosa, was that he had the measure of Narain Karthikeyan.
The fun fact is, even though that is obviously true on the track, in the championship standings it's actually not true.
Is he behind Karthikeyan in the standings?
Yeah, because Narain had a 15th at Monaco, and Pedro never got higher than 17th. So
De La Rosa's highest finish was 17th.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Though for the record, he got that one 4 times. So consistent.
Wow. One thing I remember about HRT that year is they were very reliable. Like, I mean, not even just like the whole grid was reliable, but HRT were very reliable. They had very few retirements.
Yeah, very much. They rarely finished, and most of their DNFs even came in that period where they had like no money and basically just wore out whatever parts they had left.
Yeah.
So, yeah, pretty damn solid Dallara they had.
The only thing I remember about De La Rosa is that Nico Rosberg called him out for smoking, because De La Rosa even in 2012 when he was driving for HRT was still a regular smoker. And I remember Nico Rosberg, I don't think he even had a problem with it. I think he was just like, he'd offhandedly mentioned it during an interview that one of the F1 drivers on the grid was smoking, and it turned out that it was De La Rosa. There's your random fact of the day.
I mean, if you're driving for the worst team in F1 and you are 41-year-olds, I think you're entitled to a smoke.
Smoking is bad, children.
Yeah, don't do it.
De La Rosa does it. I don't know if that changes your opinion. It makes it any cooler. Pedro De La Rosa does it. But,
I just noticed a mistake of mine. The F112 was actually not a Dallara construction, so yeah. Don't want to give them credit where they don't deserve it. Already have way too much.
Give me your conclusion about 2012 and your reject podium.
I would go with third place. Would go to Caterham for their complete failure to really take that leap to more or less the better teams to really get in on the midfield meet. Especially in a year where there was a clear 9th team that was, well, easy pickings is a bit too extreme, but that was there for the taking in Toro Rosso. So, yeah, no excuse for that. Second place goes to Romain Grosjean. Simply, yeah, the first lap in that case did what he does and back then. And, yeah, it's just a miserable season that this, in a way, was even more insulting for how much promise he showed. Like, it's one thing to be bad, and it's one thing to make mistakes, and it's one thing to struggle. Everyone struggles, that's life. But the thing is, when you, in that very same period, also show, God damn, this man could be something, this man could be perhaps the real deal down the road. That is just, in a way, it's a betrayal, really. So, yeah, he's earning second place on my personal reject of the year podium. My personal reject of the year for 2012 is Bruno Senna. This will probably not come as a surprise to anybody, but the thing is, it's just not excusable. Even with all the things that you mentioned that were going against him, the fact that Bottas was earmarked for a seat, that he had not even an experienced teammate to learn from, like he actually never had that anywhere, if I recall correctly. If we don't count Christian Klein and Sakon Yamamoto, which we don't. Even that, with all that, it's just not acceptable to be that mediocre in a car that can be so much better. Like, no, I'm not giving him a pass, and signing him was a mistake, and I honestly I think, set Williams back by years, no matter how much money they got for it. And honestly was a part of the downward spiral that eventually led to the sales. So I'm not saying it's all Bruno's fault, that's ridiculous, but yeah, it was just a horrible year, a slow year, a mediocre year, and just a year to forget for him and the team, and thus he is my personal reject of the year.
Yeah, I mean, damn. Yeah, there you go. I mean, I remember when I was researching my profile for Bruno Senna, I remember one of the main comments at the time was that it was very telling that Williams had chosen 2 South American pay drivers, but also kind of a miracle that they did as well as they did with the drivers they had. Not that Bruno Senna did well, because he didn't. He was terrible, but like Maldonado, at least, it's like it was in many ways a miracle. Like
yeah, for sure.
They'd fired Barrichello, who, as I kind of agree with you, probably would have done a perfectly okay job in the car. And they replaced Barrichello with someone who was basically completely useless. I'm not sure if it's a testament more to Williams' downfall for picking two South American pay drivers, or a testament to Maldonado for getting as many points as he actually did in that car, because it was he and Bruno Senna were dreadful, but I think Bruno Senna, as we discussed earlier, bears all the weight of that judgment.
Yeah.
If I might go for my reject of the year podium,
I would love to.
My number three is Bruno Senna. So as we've just spoken about, that's why I wanted to talk a bit about him just there. Often the reject of the year can be juggled between teams and drivers. I'm much more of a fan of judging drivers than teams. I think it's far more interesting. And the issue that comes with 2012 is that I have a clear reject of the year, which I mentioned earlier, but the number of candidates for second and third are really difficult. There's so many of them. So my number 2 is the same as your number 2. It's Romain Grosjean, for the same reasons that you brought up. You've already said everything basically. And my number 1 is Heikki Kovalainen, and for the reasons that I brought up earlier, were that he had such a fall from grace from 2011, where he had proven himself as being a very talented driver if he could just get the results, and then in 2012 he clearly just wasn't even trying to get results anymore, and by the end of the year he was out and his career was over, and I think he's just dreadful. You could say that it was down to Caterham being so bad, but I'm far more interested in the drivers themselves. Maybe I'm kind to Caterham.
That's something that in a way ties back to the point that I made about Grosjean, and that when you have a driver whom you know is good, who you know can be good, who has had such an elite season really, and then he comes out flat-lined, done with everything, just phoning it in. Again, it subconsciously feels like a betrayal. Like, realistically, in rational mind, you know, he is dismotivated because of the mediocre situation he's in, or even in the bad situation he's in, but the reality is you subconsciously expect him to still put his effort out there, and he did not do that, so I fully see where you're coming from.
And there we have it. I think that is a good time to eventually end our very, very long podcast. Who knows how long it will be in the final product, but we are on 2.5 hours of recording here, so...
that was a very productive recording session, and it's been a pleasure. I was actually quite nervous for my podcasting debut, but you did a very good job leading me through it, so thank you very much.
It's been good fun.
Alright, and that's it for the Teammate Collision. We hope you enjoyed our pilot, and pay attention because there will be more coming in the future, because as we all know, where teammates are close, teammates collide.